So that is what Apache Flume does. So essentially, any continuously generated data that work as a stream. So Flume as a tool can read data from there and then writes into the SDFS system. That's what the target is. So at a simplest level, working a Flume is shown by the diagram. Diagram is taken from the book. So we have a web server. We would like to write the log of web server onto SDFS system. What you see, the entire box is basically Flume agent. And thus Flume agent basically has three components: source, sink, and the channel. Source, source will get data from the main source. It could be web server, it could be social media generated content, it could be Twitter feedback, and whatever you like to name. Then it goes to the channel, basically becomes buffering, because this data could be coming at random. Sync writing would be a uniform pace. So you want to put space out, you want to do some kind of buffering, nothing would be lost. So channel will have data in memory, sync component will read it and write into it. So three components. First is the source. Its primary job is to read data from incoming stream, sends to the channel. As an agent, the source component can send data to multiple channels, need not be only one. As you said, input data could be from an actual entity or it could be another agent. And we'll see that if you need to do pipelining or a DAG notation, how the Flume agent could work, and we'll look at those connectivity. Channel, main job of channel is basically works like a queue or a buffer where it gets data from source and then sync reads the data from it. Most of the time, the data in buffer will remain in memory, but data cannot be lost. So it may have to be write into the disk temporary purposes if memory is becoming full. But in general, it basically acts as a buffer between source and sync to make sure that data flows at constant rate. Because incoming data could be at a different rate. It may come in the burst, no data, but write has to return in a consistent flow manner based on the capacity of the system, and hence we need the channel part of it. Then you have a sync, whose main job is to write data to the SDFS, or it could be another Flume agent. So it could be SDFS file system, it could be local file system, it could be another Flume agent. Process would remain the same. Only restriction sync imposes is it can read data only from one channel. Whereas source can read from multiple sources, it can read from multiple web servers, it can write to multiple channels, but sync can read only from one channel. If you want to build a pipeline of Flume agent, we could have one Flume agent, source reading from some source, for example, web server, writes into the channel, which acts like a queue or a buffer, goes to sync, and sync will give it to another Flume agent. So I'm connecting two agents. Now when data goes from one sync to the source of another Flume agent, they basically follow a particular data format, which has to be serialized and serialized at the time of writing, deserialized at the time of reading, and this particular format is called Avro format, and you'll basically see Avro call and even Avro remote procedure call. Basically, sync could be invoking RPC call and writing into the source of the flow. And then this could have a number of sequences. Or if you want to define like a DAG or a graph, it need not be a single pipeline. It could be a kind of a graph. So I have one Flume agent reading from one web server, second Flume agent reading from second web server, and so on and so forth. And all these three agents write onto a single source of fourth Flume agent. And we said source could read from multiple sources. So this all is Avro formatted data. It puts together, consolidates, right into the buffer, and then this data would be read by sync and written into HDFS file system. And HDFS is distributed, but it basically gives you a logical view of your data. This link is given by the author in one of his notes. If you look at the notes to install Flume and work with it, it's an example of how the whole web server logs are written. It's a good article to read, and I recommend you to read through. That will probably help you understand how does actually Flume works. So we have a number of users which are accessing web. The users make a HTTP request, they get the response. So each request response generates a log. We're running a web server. On the same machine, we have Flume agent. Flume agent will basically read the logs and write to another Flume agent. So multiple web servers could write to this Flume agent, and this Flume agent will basically act as HDFS client and write HDFS data, and actual data would go to different commodity servers where my actual nodes are running. And that's how the basic my Flume things work. Just to give you very, very high level overview of Flume, you can run it, install it, and installation instructions are given by the author. So you can look at the chapter 7. If you open chapter 7 in the programming part of it, you'll basically see details, section Flume, section Hive, section Uji, section Page, section Scoop, and each page you'll find a file called notes. So we look at Flume, there is a file called notes. It tells you basically how to install, how to run things up. It assumes two things: install Flume, install Telnet, and that's what I had done on the machine. It is not there by default. So on the LXM, neither you have a Telnet installed, nor you have a NC. I'll be using Netcat. You can install NC, install Flume agent, and then work with it. And then you basically look at simple tests. So what we're doing is we'll run one simple Flume agent, which will listen on some particular port, and using Netcat, cat on the net, will write some data, and so that the data goes to the Flume agent. Now it needs some configuration file explaining which is the port number I need to listen to. So let me look at simple configuration file, simpleexample.conf. So basically saying source would be type netcat or NC, and it's running on local port. So expect data to come from netcat. Netcat basically means all TCP data. So depending on source, it can do respective processing. We're saying only one channel. For multiple channels, it will give C1, C2, C3, those details, describe the sync type, put a logger, and things would happen. So let's run this Flume agent. Oh, sorry. This is the configuration file which I've given you. Let me run things. Flume, yeah, open that. My configuration file is in directory scoop. So I'll basically put scoop here. So now Flume agent is running, it is expecting Netcat as a source. So when I type anything from Netcat, you would see content coming up and displaying it here. So another window, I'll run my Netcat. Says okay, and you should see data here. Hello checking, data keep coming in, and that's the way basically Flume would work. You can get into more details, multiple Flume agents, and those would be there as part of notes. You can look at other part of it, but I'm not going into their details. Creating a Flume channel, running things up, So I will not put in there, but you can try it out, and that's the way it should work. Now I'll move on to the other two tools. We looked at Scoop and Flume. I'll move on to other two tools, which is Oozie and HBase. When we started with our Hadoop programming, we started with MapReduce. Then we go to chaining. What did chaining do? When we use chaining, what was happening in chaining? Hadoop chaining. How was it working? Nitish? Deepika? Amog? Akshata? Anyone like to answer? Amogha?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. What did we do in chaining? When you talk about chaining, what did we do? Hadoop chaining. Anyone else?
So the output of the suppose there are if n mappers, the
Yeah.
output of the first mapper would be the input to the second mapper,
Yeah.
and
No,
second to the third.
So MapReducer, output of one MapReducer job would go to another MapReducer job. And there could be multiple such dependencies. Thanks. Now, this dependency we defined, did we do through coding, through a program, or did we define through configuration file? When you say output of one mapper reducer will go to the as input to another MapReducer, was it driven through our program code, or was it defined through some configuration file?
Program. Classes.
So we basically wrote a program, we define the dependency. Now, if you need to write a program, it becomes a cumbersome process. We would like that we should be able to specify this dependency through some configuration. So that means each job becomes independent. When we looked at our graph.java program, that output of one MapReducer is to another. So every time you define dependency, you write a program, create a jar file, which becomes a cumbersome process. So can you define a workflow which basically indicates that these MapReduce jobs, output should go to this one, this MapReduce job. So we can define the whole graph dependency through the configuration file, and each MapReduce job could run independently. That capability of defining a workflow is given by the Oozie. That's what basically Oozie is. So rather than defining a dependency through the code, we can define configuration file. With that, we get a lot of freedom, lot of flexibility, and then we can, the way we want to do multiple map jobs, we can write multiple jobs and then group them together to create a much bigger job. It becomes a lot more easier. We get flexibility, and that essentially is done by Oozie. Other tool we look at is HBase, which is a distributed, scalable, non-SQL or non-RDBMS database, makes use of Hadoop. And resources, again, Oozie, go to oozie.apache.org. There are other resources for HBase, go into that. I haven't installed both of them, so I may not be able to give you a demo, but basically give you an idea how they would work. More on theory details part of it. So Oozie, I just said, is basically a workflow director system. It runs and manages multiple Hadoop jobs via configuration files. So we'll look at simple workflow example, how it will work, and then we can get into more details of how does my Oozie would basically work. As we said, in chaining, developer has to write the code, but here we are basically writing ourselves we define it, how things run, and sometimes we get confused that workflow is also done by Yarn, but there is a significant difference between workflow management of UGI versus Yarn. Yarn manages resources for a given MapReduce job. That which mapper has to run on which node, and if particular mapper has failed, it has to restart, it has to split the job. So the whole concept of input split, mapper, combiner, reducer, output, managing resources for those MapReduce job is done by the Yarn. Whereas my UGI define dependency of workflow between different MapReduce jobs. So understand the key difference. So primary, the UGI provides mechanism to control and connect different the reduce job and Hadoop jobs on the node cluster, and this can be done through configuration files. This gives you a lot more flexibility. So what kind of jobs UGI does? There probably you can say we'll look at only one, but there are two other kinds. So mostly we deal with workflow jobs, which basically means sequence of Hadoop jobs. Sequence need not be chain, need not be linear. It could actually be a graph, directly a cyclic graph. That should be fine, which basically defines output of one action is completed. Action meaning one MapReduce job is completed. How do we start the next Hadoop job? I want to start, and that is basically workflow. Next type is coordinator. In workflow, with direct dependencies, we cannot schedule at different point in time. So coordinate basically enables us to schedule workflow jobs at different intervals of time or when data is available rather than immediately. Third is the bundle, which is basically batch of coordinator job. So mostly we'll confine ourselves to workflow part of it and not the others. Now, how does UGI work with our Hadoop ecosystem? So what kind of components of Hadoop we have looked at? First, we look at MapReduce programming, which was Java. Then we extended this MapReduce to enable the other programming languages, and we have to enable other programming languages to use Hadoop ecosystem. What is the interface we defined or the component? We could run a program on Python or Shell or even Unix commands as a Hadoop jobs, and we use a one concept. Does anyone recollect what was that? Divya? It was Hadoop streaming. Streaming basically means each MapReduce job would read from a standard input and write into standard output. Then we look at the pig. What is the pig component? What does the pig do? Pig and hive. We discussed in the last class. Anup? Anusa? Would you like to say what is pig and hive? Bhavesh? Looks like you guys come in, join, and go away. Don't even be there. Chandana? Simply marking attendance and going away is not going to do good to you. Indrasena?
So I think basically it is used to handle like a large set of data sets, sir.
Which one, pig or hive?
Pig, sir.
How? Because Hadoop is meant for handling large data sets. So what is so specific to pig?
Like we can write lengthy programs in small number of lines. For example, say in layman, in simple examples, we use string tokenizer Uh,
Java program
as a class.
that was not Pig.
Yes,
Pig
sir,
is
that was an
basically
example.
scripting language.
Yes, sir.
It's basically scripting language. So rather than writing large programs, we can use script to get quick results, and that is Pig. And what was Hive?
Database.
Hive was not a database. Hive is basically, yeah, go ahead.
Something like SQL, sir, where we store the data, HDFS.
Yeah. So Hive gives you SQL-like interface to deal with HDFS data. So you can view HDFS data more like SQL. So follow SQL syntax to work with HDFS data. And that was Hive. Then we looked at Scoop. Scoop is to import and export data from actual RDBMS. HDFS is not RDBMS. Scoop is to migrate data from RDBMS to HDFS and vice versa. So different components. So OG can work with all these components, basically entire Hadoop stack. You can work with Hadoop using CLI like we are doing command line, or we can work even with UI. Both would work fine. A simplest OG workflow is shown in the diagram. It is taken from the book, figure 7.6. So basically you start, the first node define actions. Once you start, then you map reduce job. If it is successful, you end. If it is failed, you probably indicate the error. And if successful, you write the output into map reduce job, so on and so forth. So success case, I'm defining a path by green line. If it is failing, I'm defining by the red line. And that is basically how the workflow works. We said everything has to be defined through configuration files. So basically you define workflow jobs through a language, they call it HPDL, Hadoop Process Definition Language. It follows the XML syntax. And you basically define, if you look at the data flow, we have a graph node, start node, map reduce node, end node, kill node, and different so on and so forth. So basically work with 4 kind of nodes. The book indicate 4 kinds, and the book fourth node is a typo error. It again says control flow. So first node is called control flow nodes, which basically indicate start and failure, what is to be done. So only indicate that part. Second is action node. That's where actual processing happens. Whether we run a Hive job or whether we run a map reduce job or we run our streaming job, anything the actual job processing that happens, those are called action nodes. And typically you define dependency when one action node completes, the next node starts. And if you are doing simple HDFS commands, that could also be action node. You could be running a script command. Any processing we do on a Hadoop system is basically a action node. Then your third is called fork and join node. You studied fork in your OS classes or even otherwise. When you Java program, you launch multiple threads or you launch multiple processes. Then you wait for all the process to complete. It's basically in C you call it wait PID, and join you wait thread to join. So that means you are basically creating multiple action nodes. Those jobs has to run. They run in parallel, and once they complete their execution, they need to join together. And that is basically what a join node is. And typically, the join node will wait for all this to complete, and that's why I call maybe rendezvous node its meeting point. And lastly, we have a decision control nodes. In the book, I think there's a typo error. It still says control flow node, but it actually should be decision control nodes. It basically makes a decision, has the previous action completed or failed, and based on that, you can follow different path, and that is what this will follow. So pictorially, I'll give simple diagram. So it is a complex example of workflow. We have multiple tasks. We start with MapReduce, then run 2 jobs in parallel, wait for them to complete. We decide whether success or failure, follow different paths, and so on and so forth. So in this diagram, you can identify the 4 kind of nodes. First is the control flow nodes, which basically correspond to start and end. The node which you see start and the end Since there is no failure case, so only these two nodes, start and end, are the control flow nodes. Then we have the action nodes. Action nodes are where actual job is done. Now in this diagram, which are the blocks where we are doing actual Hadoop processing? Anyone like to comment? In this diagram, which are the actual blocks where actual Hadoop processing is being done? MapReduce, we are doing MapReduce work. We are running streaming. We are doing a pig. We are running MapReduce pipes, or even Java program. It could be HDFS command lines, writing file system. So all these are basically action nodes. Next category is fork join nodes. So this is, at this point, one MapReduce, we want to run two jobs in parallel, both pig and MapReduce streaming, and then want to wait for both to be completed. So both this fork and join, these are fork join nodes, and we're left with only one node type, which is depending on the success or failure, which is called decision control nodes, and that is where it runs. So this defines kind of basic workflow of Hadoop map example there. So if you want to look at how do we define a simple workflow, so I'll give you an example. This is what we started with the basic, our workflow example. We start, run a MapReduce job, and so if we look at, in this we have four nodes: start, and on failure, kill the job, and actual MapReduce processing. So there'll be simple workflow file, which is given by the author. You can look at it. Let me open that. It's a workflow. So you can see we start, we're saying start, which is the node. From start, go to MR node, and MR node is basically action. And you indicate what is the MR node as XML, do MapReduce, all other part of details. And one job is there, either it could complete successfully or it will fail. So if it fails, where to go to, or if it succeeds, where to go to. So we define, if it succeeds, go to the end node. If it fails, error, go to the fail node. And fail node meaning you're basically reading a message. So this is a very simple map, the workflow example for defining UGI workflow. And if you want to look at more complicated examples, so in this Apache UGI, for different examples, you have different kind of applications, and each one has their own workflow. So aggregation, MapReduce. I had taken basically MapReduce simple example. You can look at pig. Again, there'll be different examples. So explore those, work it out, and that way you can define what is the workflow example would be. So this is our id.pig script. Which we done launching, reading, and writing into pig storage, and then you can look at the respective workflow for that. Again, you would see starting, start, action, pig node, and then you basically have two and the simple script, but you can look at complicated one and understand how things would work. So that was about UGI. So we have four types of nodes, summarizing it, and that's how you can define actions and things will work out. Last tool you look at is Apache HBase. It is basically distributed open source non-relational database. When you look at MySQL, DB2, Oracle DB, Postgres, all these are basically a Microsoft SQL Server. These are all RDBMS. You define relations. They follow the relational algebra. Each table to other, you define some relationship. So the NoSQL databases such as HBase, Cassandra, NoSQL itself, these are all basically NoSQL databases. And HBase is also the same thing. HBase is part of Hadoop ecosystem. It is basically modeled after Google's NoSQL database called Bigtable. I haven't read it, but those interested, there's a URL, go through that to study about the Bigtable. Essentially, what is happening is HBase makes use of HDFS file system, and HDFS file system is a distributed file system, runs on different nodes. So you already have an underlying distributed file system infrastructure. So HBase can seamlessly make use of it and leverage this HDFS file system, which is lying across server. So all the distribution part, the consistency part can be taken care of by HDFS, and all it needs to do is simply manage the data following this own basic syntax. The HBase syntax doesn't follow the SQL. It will basically its own syntax, which you need to know, and you get all kind of capability. So what does HBase gives me? Using HBase, it basically gives me linear scalability. Linear scalability means more the nodes, more the data I can get, and the performance will remain the same. Just because I got more data, my performance won't suffer because I can scale up by adding more number of commodity server, more number of nodes. So the linearly scalable. You have a consistency of read and write from HDFS itself. So basically use that. So doesn't matter where the data resides. Whenever you read, you always get a consistent view. And when you write, same thing would happen. It also enables what is called sorting of tables. And even know what sorting basically means? Have you read this concept? Possibly no. So let's say my table has 100,000 rows. And I want to keep my distributed database. I want to keep 50,000 rows in one machine and 50,000 rows on another machine for the same table. That is sorting. So you split the table vertically, 2 parts or 3 parts, and keep each part separately so that nothing gets overloaded on a given system. So this sorting of tables, that means a table could be distributed over multiple machines, and HBase does that seamlessly, provide that capability. Of course, failover part, given HDFS, it does that. And since it's based on HBase, it can make use of HBase classes, Java API, and so on and so forth. So we'll basically look at how does HBase works. Since it is a database, that basically means we are looking at the concept of a table, which is rows and columns. But the ways rows and columns are accessed and work slightly differently. Columns are grouped in called column families. That means if the 4 columns belong to something similar category representing data, they can be grouped as a single column and looked at that way. And one common example is if you look at, let's say, stock data, any stock trading, typically when you in a day, you have a highest price, you have a lowest price of the day, you have the opening price when the market opened, and last closing price when things happen. So all the 4 prices, open price at which is open, close price, the last trading price, highest during the day, lowest during the day, all are the price data. So if my column has the same prefix price, that means all the 4 columns belong to the column family, and that is what basically means the columns could belong to column family. But only requirement is those columns belong to same family should have same prefix, like you can PR or price column. Of course, all the column members that belong to same family should reside in the same physical file system. We cannot have 2 columns on one machine and 2 columns on different machines. A column could be independent as well. For example, volume. There's nothing called opening volume because volume is total number of stocks traded in a day, and that is what column volume would be. So column could be independent or column could be a group, and HBase supports basically both. Now, since we have a fields, a cell is basically identified by row and the column. So you'll have a row key and then column name that identifies the cell value. So row key, column name, and anytime you write data into a cell, it is not erased and written new, it is version. So you can look at all the versions, previous version, so maintain the version. So to access value of any cell field, you have to give the row key value, you have to give the column name, and you have to give the which version number, and then you'll get the actual data. As we said, anytime you write data into a cell, it is not overwritten, a new version is created, and typically version is work like a timestamp. So each time data is written into a cell, the, that timestamp at which time is created, that becomes a version number, and time always increasing, hence version number would monotonically increase. Now, how do you define the row key? Row key could be any binary number representation, or it could be a string, or it could be even any complex data type serialized, and you can use that, and that anyway you can get the key. So typically, the example we use the date as a timestamp as a row key, but there could be any other values that could be fine. It's a NoSQL data, so row would be ordered, and like primary key you can put in order. So row would be ordered typically in the lexicographical order. So look at the row content, you compare them lexicographically, and then that's how it defines the row order. And you basically access the rows via key, which is called a primary key, and that's how the rows are accessed. So I'll give you a very basic overview of working how HBase works. So just a theory, I have not installed it. So I'm just giving you the example taken from the book. How does that HBase basically works? So you start HBase cell, you will get a HBase prompt. Now, since it's a distributed, it works on a distributed system, you like to know how many servers is running on. The status command will basically tells you that running on 4 server, all the 4 servers are live, there are no dead servers, and average is service, so on and so forth. You basically get timestamp value when things are running. Now, since database is basically rows, tables, and each table is rows and columns, so we should be able to give a notion of creating tables. So we can say create table, and in this example, the date will be as a row key. So creating a table apple, and the 2 columns, one is price, one is volume, and as you will see, price is actually a family of columns, a 4 column group together. And this will be defined when we add the data to it. So we say put, I'm saying into date apple, my key is the date, and I'm saying price as a column prefix. So price colon open, this is the value, price colon high, this is the value. So basically means for the table apple, I have the column price, which has the 4 columns, price colon open, price colon close, price colon high, price colon low, and then I have another column called volume. Volume is not displayed here, so it has been displayed. So you have basically these things, and data gets put in. And now you want to access the data to basically like put is putting the data. To read the data, you do the get operation, and get means you have to specify the key. So you say get table name and the key. So our rows are specified using date. You put in the date as a key. So it gives you basically the columns and all the 5 fields, which is price as a family of 4 columns, and the volume, you'll basically see price close, timestamp is the version, the value, each cell has their own timestamp, high, because they're put in different point in time, you'll see different times, so 4 columns, so all the columns, so don't look at that the entire row is created at the same time, because different cell values could be added differently, and each cell would have its own different version number. So it's not that all the columns, all the fields of a row will be updated at the same time. Different cell fields could have a different update values, and those are indicated by the version number. And then you have a poll. So these 4 columns belong to the column family, and then you basically volume 5 columns. Now we can selectively remove a column for a particular key. So one row corresponding to key 6 may would have all the 5 columns. Another row corresponding to 7th may could have only 7 columns or 3 columns. So we can delete a column, say delete Apple, column price, column low. When I access data for the date 6 May, you'll see only 3 columns, not the low part, but for other date, you'll see all the 5 columns. So that means it's not necessary that you'll get all the columns will be consistent, and that's the meaning of my lexicographical ordering. That's how things will work out. You can delete a column. It supports bulk upload, basically the tool call or utility call import TSV. So when you do bulk upload like import into, we read from data, TSV stands for tab separated value. That means all the field should be tab separated. So given CSV file, you first convert into CSV format, tab separated format, and then do an import, and then things will work out. So this is a basic overview of my HBase. So to summarize, we basically look at 6 tools. First one was Pig, scripting language. Then we looked at Hive, which gives me SQL-like syntax. Then we looked at Scoop, which basically enables us to read and write data or import and export data from RDBMS. Then we look at Flume, which basically processes streams of incoming data and enables to write onto HDFS file system. Then we had a workflow called UGI. So rather than defining my dependency of chaining through the program code, we can define this dependency through configuration file using Hadoop process definition language, and that is UGI. And lastly, as a non-SQL or non-relational database with a component called HBase, the 6 different components tools we studied, and this basically is all chapter 7. So next class, we'll get into chapter 8, which is basically yarn. We looked at yarn, it schedules the mapper job, reducer job. We look at how does yarn do the job, and that is what we'll study next. So done for today's class. If anybody any questions, you can feel free to ask, or we can probably stop here.